Okay, good morning, and thank you for joining us. I am Major Angel Tomko, the moderator of this panel. Today, we will speak with 5 members of the Army team who have helped shape, contribute to, or review the new Parenthood, Pregnancy, and Postpartum Army Directive. What initially began as a grassroots effort by soldiers across the force to identify issues facing pregnant and postpartum soldiers became formal policy today. This directive includes the distinct policy changes and is aimed 12 distinct policy changes and is aimed at improving opportunities for soldiers to advance their careers while providing the time and flexibility needed to care for and grow their families. If I can direct you to the screen, you'll see several individuals who have helped promote these policies. This directive highlights how soldiers can affect positive change by providing important feedback to the Army. It was inspired by parents, for parents, and will impact approximately 400,000 parents who serve in our total force. Joining us today on this panel is Sergeant Major Mark Clark, the Army G1 Sergeant Major, Miss Amy Kramer, the lead policy action officer for this directive. She currently serves as the Special Assistant for the Undersecretary of the Army. Lieutenant Colonel Kelly Bell, the 7203rd Medical Support Unit Commander, and both her and Sergeant Major Clark are going to be dialing in virtually. Major Sam Winkler, Brigade Human Resources Officer for the 4th Cavalry Brigade, and Staff Sergeant Nicole Edge, who is currently instructing at Basic Leaders Course at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Today's media roundtable will last 60 minutes, ending no later than 12:30 p.m. We will begin with opening statements from each panel member and then take your questions. For the Q&A segment, when called upon, please provide your name and affiliation and limit yourself to 1 question and 1 follow-up question. I will announce when we have time for 1 last question. When we have completed the Q&A, each panel member will provide a closing statement. Information for follow-up questions will be provided at the end of the discussion. For both our panel members and the media, please remember to identify yourselves prior to speaking, and please remember to mute your devices if you're not speaking. At this time, I'd like to introduce Sergeant Major Mark Clark. Over to you, Sergeant Major, for opening remarks.
Hey, good morning, ma'am, and maybe good evening to some, depending on where you are in the world. First and foremost, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I am definitely excited to be here. I have both a professional and a personal interest in what we are doing today by providing these options for soldiers through the policy. As my role as the Army G1 Sergeant Major and manning our force, I would tell you this will be a huge lift to us as we create opportunities for well-deserving soldiers who are very talented to be able to continue to serve as soldiers, but also be able to have better opportunities to provide for their families so that they can, stay within the Army as we recruit soldiers and retain their families. This is an awesome opportunity for them. But also from a personal standpoint, as I too was once a single parent of 3 children at Fort Irwin, California, where I understand a lot of unique challenges that soldiers in that status endure. And luckily for me, I had the right leadership at that time, but some of my peers weren't always as lucky. And as I was determining whether to stay in the Army or to focus on my family, I had a great leadership that gave me the opportunity to stay in. And if you put that into context and think about it, that captain and that first sergeant at the time didn't realize that they were retaining the future Army G1 Sergeant Major of the Army. And so as we look at what this policy creates for us, we are possibly retaining the next future Chief of Staff of the Army or next Sergeant Major of the Army through critical changes like this in the Army. But not only as a single parent, I'm also dual military as well. So I've experienced some unique challenges associated with wanting to, again, serve with my spouse and also serve in the Army. And so I believe a lot of soldiers will be excited about the changes that we're making today. Over to you, ma'am.
Major, definitely appreciate that. We'll go to Miss Amy Kramer.
Good morning. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're really excited to share this groundbreaking change with you all today. As Sergeant Major Clark said, the Army recruits soldiers but retains families, and we believe that the policy changes included in this directive will do just that. I'd like to hit 4 points, I think, that characterize all of the changes in this large omnibus directive. First, it clarifies and makes permanent many existing policies to ensure more equitable application across the Army. It also introduces some new and exciting novel changes to put people first and to better invest in the health, wellness, and long-term readiness of the force. Second, this directive also aligns Army policies, both existing and new, with medical recommendations, such as convalescent leave recommendations from the Defense Health Agency, as well as updated lactation guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Third, this directive equitably applies to the extent possible all accommodations and changes to the National Guard and Reserves, to members of all components, because we are one Army. And fourth, we're most excited to share that this directive is inclusive, it's gender neutral, and it's inclusive of fathers, of all new parents, including adoptive parents and guardians of long-term foster children. IS will benefit, as Major Tomko said, over 400,000 parents in the Army. And we can't wait to answer your questions and share it with the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. We're going to go to Lieutenant Colonel Bell, who's coming in to us virtually.
Morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to have been a part of this entire process from the beginning. I have been working advocacy and policy updates for military moms for the last several years, and it's so exciting to see this culmination come together today. I know our work is just starting today, but it's super exciting and really looking forward to seeing all the benefits that this is going to have for parents and leaders throughout the Army, and hopefully to be able to make changes again throughout the entire DoD to help all of our military families. Back to you, ma'am.
Thanks, Colonel Bell. We'll go over to Major Sam Winkler.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to be here and to be able to roll out this directive. I'm an Army mom, I'm a wife, and I've been in around 16 years, and this is really exciting. I've been a part of this since the grassroots effort portion, so this all started with a white paper that was generated from the force where we got ideas from moms and parents around the force about changes that they'd like to see. And we were able to take that small white paper and turn it into policy in the last year. And it's really exciting to see where it is and releasing it today and making the changes it will make for parents across the Army is really a great thing to see. So I am really excited to answer questions and be here and speak to you. So good morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, Major Winkler. Now we're going to go over to Staff Sergeant Nicole Edge.
Good morning, Staff Sergeant Edge. I am one of the original authors of the white paper that Major Winkler mentioned. I am also the founder of the Army Mom Life, which is how this all came to fruition. I'm honored to be here this morning, and it's really a great thing to see that this is actually coming to fruition and it's going to be implemented, and I cannot wait to see how this is going to impact both mothers and fathers across the force.
Thank you, Staff Sergeant Edge. So now we're going to shift over to questions, and we are going to begin with Davis Winky with Army Times. Davis, if you're on the line.
Hi, thank you for putting this together, and thank you for the opportunity to ask a question here. My question is for Staff Sergeant Edge. You have been one of the public faces of this push online, so to speak. And I just wanted you to reflect a little bit on kind of the unseen labor and work that goes into being a public standard bearer for something like this, and what it's been like trying to navigate that.
So for me, unfortunately, I'm one of the ones that I like to kind of stay in the background, and I like to be able to do the work without getting the recognition. Some of them have kind of pushed me to the front, but it's easy for me because I enjoy making sure that the changes come to fruition. I enjoy seeing the impact that it's going to have on our soldiers. So I would honestly do anything to be able to make sure that these changes get pushed and that the force is going towards a modern force rather than staying as it is.
And Davis, did you have a follow-up question?
I totally did. Can I launch into it?
Yes, go ahead.
And then, Sergeant Edge, in your perspective as a mid-grade NCO, you're kind of more intimately involved with day-to-day Army life than a lot of the people who would typically be involved in framing and creating policies. You know, how important are shifts like these in improving service member quality of life and potentially retention?
It is a huge thing to improve quality of life. In the Facebook group, we get posts every day, probably I would say around 50 to 75 posts from Army moms. Unfortunately, we don't really get to talk to the dads because our group is specifically for Army moms because we share some intimate details in there. But they constantly are sharing with us how the changes as they are right now are impacting their career, being held back from promotion or having difficulties being a breastfeeding mom or a lactating mom. And I know, I wish I could be in the group right now as this is dropping to see how excited they are to see these changes that are going to help improve their quality of life. And I think this is going to be a huge thing for retention of soldiers that we have currently trained. You know, the Army spends a lot of money on soldiers to train them and to keep them in the force. So I think it's going to be extremely impactful with retention, but I also think it is going to be huge for recruitment as well because our civilians are going to see us be able to make the force more modern, and they're going to want to, I hope that they want to come in and stay or serve with the Army.
Thanks, Davis. And actually, I think Major Winkler has an additional comment for that.
Yeah, you know, the one thing I'd like to just add to that, what's so exciting about this Army directive is that we have created, and I'm not, you know, a feedback loop, a true feedback loop, right? Like, we have voices that started at the soldier level that was heard all the way by our Army senior leaders, and they listened, and they took, you know, they took charge and they made changes. So I think we really have to be excited about this feedback loop that happened and we got changes because we came to the table with real solutions. And it's really exciting that our Army leaders like Sergeant Major Clark listened and helped us with these changes. So I just wanted to kind of add that on.
Thank you. We are going to go to Haley Britsky from Task and Purpose. Haley, if you're on the line.
Hi, I am. I think Colonel Bell just had something she wanted to add, so I wanted to go ahead and pass it back to her.
Add on to what Major Winkler said, in that, you know, we have the whole People's First initiative, which is fantastic, but sometimes you can't fix what you don't know is broken. And we've been talking about that over the last year too, is that as these issues kind of came up from the very ground level, the individual soldier, and then the Army senior leaders listened, sometimes they had no idea that these issues were happening or happening for so long. And they absolutely wanted to make a change to make things better because they didn't know some of these things were happening. So it's not that they were being ignored. They just really didn't know what was happening down at the individual soldier level.
Thanks, ma'am. Haley,
Yes.
over to you.
Thank you. And thank you all for doing this. I'm wondering if you all, Colonel Bell and Major Winkler and Staff Sergeant Edge, could maybe just share some of your insights, whether personal experiences or just experiences that you've heard in this group. For those who may not understand, like, what kind of challenges soldiers and parents are facing, why these changes are so critical, and just some examples of how things haven't worked in the past that we're hoping could be resolved in the future with these new changes.
I'll go first. So for myself, I've been serving for almost 9 years this year. I feel like I may have I might be one of the moms that has been impacted the most, and these changes would have been great back then. In 2016, I got pregnant for the first time, and unfortunately that resulted in a miscarriage for me. During that time, I elected to have a D&C, and when I got out of the hospital, it's the same day surgery, so you go in the morning, you're out by the afternoon. And I looked at my con leave form, and I had 2 days of con leave. And I actually ended up asking my doctor, hey, can I get a little more time? I just lost my child. My whole life just changed before my eyes. Can I have a little more time? And my doctor actually came back and said, there was no complications with your surgery, so no, you can't have more time. And so I actually ended up taking 2 weeks of chargeable leave to be able to process and mourn the loss of my family and the future that I thought I was going to have. And then you flash forward to 2019, and I had my first child. And then 4 months after she was born, I was in the field. And unfortunately for me, I don't want to say unfortunately, it was just bad timing. It wasn't planned, but as I was in the field 4 months postpartum, I ended up finding out that I was pregnant again. And so I was set back in PME when I found out I was pregnant with my first. The same day my pregnancy test came back positive was the same day I got hard slotted for ALC. Unfortunately, when you get a temporary profile, you no longer are eligible for PME, so I lost my slot. When I had my first child, I thought I would get re-slotted for PME, and then I found out I was pregnant again, so once again, I was deferred PME. And then in 2020, I had my second child in April, and I had to fight hard to get a PME slot, and it took until March 2021 to be able to secure that slot. And during that time, I actually went to ALC with a soldier that was a private first class of mine at my second duty station. So all of these policies, the temporary promotion policy, the lactating policy, as well as the temporary promotion policy and I'm sorry, I think I already said that one. I meant to say the miscarriage policy for con leave. All of those would have greatly impacted my life and made it a little more easier to navigate the Army as a mom. But I think I've done a good job persevering. So I'm very excited for these changes because while I might be impacted, because I'm not sure I want another child, I think I'm very excited that I can sleep better at night knowing that other moms will not have to go through the same things that I had to go through.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And just for clarification, can you clarify what con leave is, PME, and what you meant by hard slotting?
Oh, sorry. Con leave is convalescent leave. So whenever you have any type of medical issue, you get leave. Yes, non-chargeable leave. PME is professional military education. So it's a school that we have to go to in order to be promoted to the next rank. And then hard slot. So there's two types of ways to get into PME. You can be hard slotted, which means you for sure have a slot. Your name is enrolled in that school, and there's no way you will not have a slot, or you can walk on, and so I was hard slotted for my PME.
Perfect, thank you. And so for other panel members, would you like to add?
So, I don't have a lot of personal stories, but what I'd like to add on is Sergeant Pierce invited me a year ago, I think now, to be a part of this Facebook group. And also while I was doing that, I got to be a part of another great Army initiative called Your Voice Matters. So I was getting, to listen to a lot of soldiers at a lot of different installations and on social media. And it was really eye-opening for me. And a part of it was I felt like soldiers trusted me with their stories. So I had a responsibility and obligation to kind of bring this up and fix it. And I'll just go over, a couple of things that I had never thought about because I hadn't been through it. But I remember a young soldier, and I don't remember where, but his wife and him were gonna go through some fertility treatment. And they had spent over $40,000 out of pocket to start this treatment. And, the Army didn't have any policies for how to manage that family. And so the soldier came down on orders and there wasn't really anything anybody could do for them because we didn't have a policy that took care of that. So now we have a common sense policy that we placed, right? So if you are going through fertility treatment, whether it's you or your spouse, that the Army can stabilize you for a year. And I think that's huge because it's recognizing that in 2022, we have all different kinds of families going through all different kinds of life issues, and we can really take care of our families so we can retain the best of our soldiers. So I think for me, those were some of the stories that we have been able to translate into common sense policies, which is really exciting. And so, yeah, I hope that helped, Haley.
And if I may add just, quickly, so I'm sitting here in the Pentagon, and this wasn't just a white paper that was delivered to us once, and we said, thanks, okay, we get to work. The feedback mechanism or feedback loop was constant. So every time our working group would develop a policy, we'd send it back to the team that wrote the original white paper and, say, what do you think about this? They say, well, we just heard a post from a mom 2 days ago that suggests that's actually going to make a world of a difference to that family. Or they would come to me and my team and say, hey, we heard this story. Is this an appropriate add to the policy? We say, well, why not? Let's throw it in. And so the relationships that have been built, the feedback loop that has been established to really make a difference in real people's lives cannot be overstated. Every single policy change in this directive has a story behind it.
Most of the policies that are going into place today are not going to affect me as an individual soldier. I'm not going to have more children. The family care plan policy for sure will benefit me. But I took command, my first command, and I was only a few weeks pregnant, actually. So I went through my entire command either pregnant or with a very young child. And I had to leave my newborn at 3 months old to go to my first sergeant and commander's course. So that meant, childcare for a 3-month-old. It meant trying to pump, and she was exclusively breastfed at that time. So I'm pumping through the class, and I was very lucky with awesome leaders, and the schoolhouse that I went to was very supportive. So I didn't run into a lot of the issues that our younger soldiers ran into. But again, seeing those back even from when we were working on the lactation undershirt authorization, it's all driven by the soldiers that are experiencing issues and how can we make this military better for them. And so now on my second command, I'm a higher ranking officer, and I'm super excited for these policies to be put into place because they're going to give me the tools to truly empathetically lead the soldiers. And the soldiers are the sons and daughters of the American people, right? And they're entrusted to me as their leader to take care of them. And this Army directive is truly going to be I'm going to be able to put people first and really take care of soldiers and families as we move forward.
And we'll go back to Haley. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you all so much for sharing all of that. I think, as we move forward with, the stories we're going to write, but then also just pushing this policy out to the world, I think a lot of times people tend to look at this and see it just as like a women's issue and a mom's issue. Obviously, there are so many, as mentioned in the press release, single fathers. There are no shortage of dads in the Army as well. So I'm wondering if you can maybe just talk through what this means for them and why this is important to them as well.
Okay, we're going to go to Ms. Kramer.
So thank you, Haley, for the excellent question. So we're really excited in the several ways that this directive affects non-birth parents. I'll highlight a few, and then we'll, of course, reserve the right for my fellow panelists to add. But probably most excitingly is the operational and training deferment. So this was, a version of this was originally required by Congress 2 years ago, but it only applied to the active component, and it was only for birth parents. And so something that this directive will do is extend it to any non-birth parent as necessary to ensure that at least one parent is home with their child throughout the 365-day period. We recognize that modern families don't necessarily have a male soldier in the Army with a stay-at-home spouse, a wife at home taking care of a kid. That a modern family may have a male soldier with a CEO spouse or a firefighter spouse or a dual military spouse, and it recognizes that in these modern families, there are needed changes required to allow opportunities for primary caregiver male soldiers to also be eligible for this deferment, and so they can seek through there's a way that is outlined through the directive for them to seek this deferment as well. We're also excited about the fertility treatment policy. I mean, this is one of the new and novel changes that the directive implements that was previously highlighted. But whenever a soldier is undergoing fertility treatment, both members of a dual Army couple will be stabilized. And the stabilization will also apply to any soldier whose spouse is undergoing fertility treatment, even when that spouse is a civilian. So that's a really direct way where male soldiers, the majority of our force will be eligible for this. And we stabilize soldiers when their children are seniors in high school. There's no reason why we should not stabilize them at the beginning of that family timeline, when they're first trying to grow their families, recognizing a lot of the unique circumstances and challenges that exist for our military parents and those who wish to become parents. Third, this is another new and novel change, the miscarriage or perinatal loss policy. The Army will be the only service so far to apply this convalescent leave to male soldiers acknowledging emotional loss after this very significant life event. So in addition to the convalescent leave provided to the female soldier that undergoes the actual miscarriage for physical healing and emotional healing, male soldiers, their spouses will also be eligible after this very significant life event. And third, family care plans. This is one of the greatest pressures for soldiers right now, and the clarifications outlined in this directive, I think, will benefit all parents to ensure that they can both fulfill all of their Army responsibilities and also be home to take care of their kids and take them to doctor's appointments when they're sick, and all of the natural life events that happen for parents. The directive, the policy is not gendered. It will apply to everyone. So I think those are probably the four biggest changes that will positively affect our male soldiers and our fathers across the force.
Thanks, Amy. Do the panelists have other comments to add to that?
Sergeant Major Clark.
Sergeant Major Clark?
Yes, if I may. A couple of points, and obviously from a male perspective. So of course, during my opening comments, I made mention of the unique challenges that I face as a single parent. Of course, I was not aware that there was that many other male single parents in the Army who were obviously enduring a similar situation. However, as a young PFC in the Army, my firstborn child only lived for 7 days. And of course, as a PFC, just joining the military, I didn't have enough actual leave days to actually take the time off to not only figure out how a PFC who is not financially secure to bury my child and ship him back home, but to also be there to comfort my significant other and get the emotional counseling that we both needed during that time frame of losing something like this. So the fact that this policy is, addresses parenthood as a whole, I think is a huge win for soldiers, and it shows that the Army in itself cares, which is one of the reasons why I'm just very passionate and excited about this, because again, I have a lot of personal interest, and I wish a policy like this was available for me then. But again, I was lucky that I had good leaders who made smart decisions during that time frame. But unfortunately, we've had soldiers who have not been so lucky to be able to take care of soldiers. And I think this policy helps give commanders better left and right limits of how to truly put people first.
So I think the favorite part of the Army directive for me, and it's something we really believe in the Army mom life, is that we want to normalize parenthood for the Army and the military, right? Because we believe that normalizing parenthood is important, and parenthood is something that, most of us in the Army are in our childbearing ages. So parenthood should be celebrated and it should be encouraged, and you shouldn't have to choose between a career and having a family. So we really think normalizing parenthood will not only retain our best soldiers, but it will also really help us in recruiting the best talent that is out there that's available to the force. And I think it will really help with readiness, because you can't be the most lethal, talented force if you don't have people. And we can bring in the best people that the country has to offer if we normalize some of these things like parenthood. So it is my favorite part about the policies that we are normalizing parenthood.
Thank you. And we're going to head over to Haley. Does that answer your question? I know that was very long.
It does. Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, I think Colonel Bell was just speaking again, so I just wanted to make
No,
sure.
I'm sorry. I think I'm quiet at the beginning, but not only does this directive normalize parenting, but I know it was mentioned earlier, but I just want to expand on the gender neutral part of this policy, and that we're recognizing, obviously the spouse, the significant other, but there's a lot of terminology throughout the directive that is gender neutral, because we recognize that, again, the traditional, male father, female mother, that's not so traditional anymore. And you have single parents, you have single mothers, single dads, but you also have same gender couples that are, they use fertility treatment if they're female, or, on the male side, adopting. You have transgender soldiers. So this directive really is all inclusive of all parenting, and that is super exciting.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go over to Rose Thayer from Stars and Stripes.
Hey, thank you. And I'm glad I'm on Zoom where you can't see me, because I'm tearing up at some of these stories. I'm a mom, and so I'm in awe of any parents who endure some of the things you have and stayed in your careers as well. My question is, how does this policy apply right now to soldiers that are in some of these situations that would be changed? For example, say I'm a mom with a 6-month-old and I'm supposed to go to NTC this summer. Can I use this policy to stay home with my baby?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. There are a few cases where procedure will need to be published following this actual policy directive, and we've been working in real time with all of the proponents to ensure that any procedure that is missing, because procedure is typically not established in a secretary-signed directive, that procedure will come very expeditiously. But the policy is effective at date of signature, and so everything in here is applicable to all parents in the force.
And Rose, did you have a follow-up question?
I was going to hear what Sergeant Major had to say.
Oh, go ahead, Sergeant Major.
So in reference to the effectiveness or the effective date of some of the policies, so in reference to the temporary promotions for those needing to go to professional military education. Last year, the Army G1 Lieutenant General Brittle signed an exception to policy that allowed for soldiers who were pregnant to be temporarily promoted and still be able to go to PME later after they finish their postpartum and be trained within that timeline. Now with this Army directive, that is no longer an exception. It is actually a foregone policy. So that one has been in place already for 12 months, and we don't have to go back to get approval to extend it over and over again, thanks to the work of Amy Kramer and the team. That is now locked in stone. So we've already been applying it to soldiers. Many have already been temporarily promoted through the process. And even though we're doing temporary promotions for the Army as a whole for enlisted soldiers, even when we dial back those temporary promotions, the temporary promotions applied for pregnancy, deployed soldiers, and of course, non-resident sergeant major graduates will still be in place afterwards. Over.
All right, thank you. Rose, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes. So I noticed the policy, and y'all have mentioned this quite a bit, is parenthood, it varies, and the experience with babies and pregnancy and fertility treatments, it all is so different for every person's experience. How is the training portion of this for commanders really telling them that and making sure they understand that there's got to be some understanding and wiggle room and really knowing the policy and how to apply it?
Thank you. I mean, that's an excellent question. The directive, to the extent possible, also provides flexibility. So any individual soldier, based on their unique circumstance, can either waive a particular accommodation or return to physical readiness training early, or volunteer to go to PME and take all the physical fitness requirements. So it provides flexibility for each individual circumstance. So that's the first thing I'll say. But with regard to the education piece, because the 11 policy changes are great, but if the 12th, that leader education, is not in a place, the first 11 are not going to be as effective as they could be. So we're really dependent on leaders being good leaders and having the tools to be good leaders. And so I think that's one of the reasons we actually made this directive a single omnibus directive instead of piecemeal dealing with all of the individual policy changes. A year ago, we could have addressed the issues brought up in the white paper one by one, but instead we were charged with putting them all together so the directive itself is a tool where there is one resource instead of the 20 disparate regulations that are affected by this directive, that leaders and soldiers can go to one place and find either all of the answers to the policy questions they have or the references to the regulations that govern those answers. And so the brigade commanders will be required to publish a policy letter that will outline a lot of the maybe command-specific flexible options that are outlined by this directive. And so we believe that that will answer some of these questions and close any gaps that may remain. So each soldier within each command knows exactly what to expect when they choose to grow their families.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go over to Bianca. Bianca, are you on the line?
My name is Bianca Strakowski. I'm with Reserve and National Guard magazine. My question is for any of the leaders on the panel. What is your guidance or your own personal message to leaders at the local unit level about creating a culture within the unit that is accepting of this policy change, that is encouraging, so that the soldiers actually feel like they can take advantage of these updates?
That's a good question. Do you want to answer?
So obviously this gives us more flexibility to care for our soldiers. It allows us as reserve commanders to give soldiers time off when they need it in terms of, postpartum, pregnancy loss, etc. It also allows us to defer that soldier from going to field training exercises, going on annual training within that first month. It's really hard, a reserve soldier, a lot of times, even our duty station is not near our home. So for example, I live in Des Moines. My reserve center is in Indiana. It's a 5.5 hour drive. So just a weekend alone during what was that first 6 weeks postpartum that we were excused, but that additional time would have been beneficial up to that 3 months. And this Army directive now allows me as a commander to not only excuse my soldier for the first 3 months postpartum, but that time is still going to count towards their retirement. They're going to get points for that time. So it's not going to affect their year towards retirement in the end. And so this policy is really going to help commanders to truly take care of that postpartum soldier, and also those the other parents, the non-birth parent, they'll be excused for that first year as well from any training that's away from their home duty station, or an annual training that would be a longer time period that's away from their home of record. So they'll be able to stay with that newborn for that first year after they give birth. So that's a super exciting change with this policy.
Did you have something? Sorry, Major.
That we are asking leaders to do is obviously to make their stance and support for this policy known to all soldiers. They may have soldiers in their footprint right now who are going through these situations and who are just probably afraid to actually notify the leadership of some of the challenges that they were enduring. And so obviously, as a leader, we have to train, teach, and educate. And also, if you look at the directive, we've asked for commanders to update their leave policies to ensure that it supports the guidance that we're providing to allow soldiers to be able to take the necessary time that they need based on the situations that they're dealing with. So I'm asking every leader to ensure that not only not to simply pass around the Army directive and tell individuals to lead it, but to let your soldiers know your stance, how you feel, and that you are there to support them.
Sure. So I think the other really great thing, and Sergeant Pierce, I'm sure you can talk about this as well, you know, I think we have some really great leaders across the Army that really want to put people first and take care of them. And maybe there were some policy gaps until now that they didn't have. So I hope, you know, number one, as Sergeant Major said, every leader reads these. But I think this gives commanders a real toolkit to put people first, right? It allows you to give people convalescent leave for a loss of pregnancy. So I think what's really great is over the last year, you know, we have been contacted many times by leaders when they've had their soldiers in difficult situations. And they were also somebody we thought about when we wrote some of these things, because we had leaders who really wanted to take care of their soldiers, and we just didn't have policies to back them up sometimes. So I think part of that, you know, I think this gives leaders a real tool to take care of people and put people first at their level. And I think that's also what's incredible about this policy. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Bianca, did you have any other another question?
I do. I have one quick follow-up for Staff Sergeant Pierce. Obviously, you created an environment where soldiers were comfortable to be open about the different challenges they were facing. What would be your advice going back thinking to when you were a brand new soldier about encouraging soldiers within units to feel comfortable opening up to their leaders about, you know, the different things going on in their life? Because, you know, as Sergeant Major mentioned, they might not even realize something's going on. So what would be your advice to those younger soldiers about not being scared to speak up, to express what's going on, and not fearing the repercussion to their career?
Something that we talk about quite often in the group. A lot of the times these policies or the problems are affecting the junior enlisted soldiers more than anything, and they are often so junior enlisted or so small in rank that they don't want to bring those problems up. And sometimes they'll bring the problems to us, and then when their leadership pulls them to the side, they say that there's no problem because they don't want to be the problem. And so I think it's all about using our voice. You know, leaders, commanders, first sergeants, sergeant majors, they are people too. And you know, that's something that we talked about just yesterday. There's this mentality in the Army that this is the way it's always been, and so this is how we're going to keep it. But the Army is moving away from that mentality. We're now moving to create that more modern force so that we can retain the soldiers that we have and bring in soldiers for the future. And so I think it's all about empowering these younger soldiers, because they are they are the voice of the Army. They are going to be the future soldiers serving when I'm out, when Major Winkler's out, when Major Tomko's out. They're going to be the ones that are serving. And so I think it's important that they bring these issues to the front, because there's, you know, the saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, sometimes the leaders don't know that it's been broke. It's broke, it's been broke, it is broke. But by bringing these problems to the surface, they can say, hey, this is not working. It's not been working for a while, and we didn't know that. But just like the Army senior leaders who listened to us, who took these policies into consideration and said, you know what, we need to fix this. This is what they could do for their unit, for their post, or for the Army. And so I think it's really important that we empower younger soldiers to come forward and raise issues and make sure that they know if you do that, there's not going to be any backlash.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Bianca, for the questions. We're going to go over to Steve Bainan from military.com.
Hey, appreciate it. And I was looking through the directorate. Apologies if it's on there. The press wasn't given enough time to review it ahead of this. I saw mentions of pregnancy and such not impacting a woman's ability to attend officer PME. Is there anything in there for NCO PME, like ALC or anything like that?
All right, so I'll go first on this. To I guess establish the delineation between the two. Most of our officer PME are a PCS move, so that obviously gives the mother time to be able to attend school and obviously go through the pregnancy in itself. For non-commissioned officers who are attending the Sergeant Major's Academy, that is a 10-month-long school and also a PCS move. So we allow provisions for that as well. When we start talking about our basic leader course, advanced leader course, and our senior leaders course, depending on the military occupational specialty, those courses could be as short as 2 weeks and as long as to 12 weeks, depending on the military occupational specialty. So that is why, to get after those professional military educations, we created the temporary promotions to allow them to still get promoted. And then 12 months after their postpartum leave is done, they have an opportunity to get trained. Over.
It is my follow-up will be for the temporary promotions. Is that now a permanent policy? I wasn't tracking if that was set in stone in the Army yet, or if we were still in trial period for that.
So temporary promotions for pregnancy, deployment, and sergeant majors who attend the non-residence course is a permanent policy. The current temporary promotions that we're executing for the Army as a whole is being reviewed on a month-to-month basis. Right now, its current exception is for 12 months. Over.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. We're going to go over to Julie from the German Press Agency. Julie, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm on the line. My question would be to any leader on the panel. Again, maybe more in general, how difficult was it to get people to listen? And you already indicated that it was important to bring solutions to the table, that this is the first step. And I'm also interested in how important was it for female soldiers to have their male counterparts supporting them in order to be heard? Thanks.
Can I answer that? So, I think what was really surprising to me is I just happened to be working in the Army G1 when the white paper was written, and I thought there'd be a lot more resistance from Army senior leaders on some of these policies because they are new and innovative, and honestly, there were none. When we came to them with common sense solutions, the white paper not only put out a problem statement, but it also put out a solution, and when that happened, our Army senior leaders were willing to listen, and they really did. And just for context, this came to fruition. The working group that we did to write this Army directive was a year ago last week. So in a year, we moved this incredibly detailed, many pages Army directive in a year. And for anybody who's worked in the Pentagon, who's worked at the enterprise level, I think can really appreciate how incredible that is. So I would like to give a plug for our Army senior leaders because they are listening, they do care. People first isn't just a trendy thing. It is the thing. Like, that is what we believe. Like, we are putting people first. So I think for me there was very little resistance. And to the second part of your question, like, support is always great. And what I love the most about being on the Army is I'm always part of a great team. And so I do hope all leaders and all soldiers embrace this change and they go forward with it. So thank you so much for such a great question.
Yes,
Amy?
and as the person who had the privilege of briefing all of these senior leaders over the last year, I can give you so many examples. What Major Winkler said about no resistance couldn't be, is the truth, and I can go a step further. There were, general officers, male general officers who told their staffs, this is the priority, we'll cover your portfolio, go join this working group for a week.
Yes.
Like, that isn't just paying lip service, that is actually getting, giving up your people to make this a reality. The Sergeant Major of the Army was an integral member of reading this, I don't even know how many times, and working with us to get the words right from a very early stage, not just, approving it at the very end. I briefed the entire operational force because the G3 and the director of the Army staff recognized that if we are going to do what the Army does well, we need the right people in the right place at the right time. And to do that, we need to talk about these policies. And so it was just month after month, meeting after meeting, briefing after briefing, where it wasn't just, I support this is a good idea, go do it. It was, how can I help? Yeah. And that's just really been remarkable.
Great, thank you. We are going to go over to Jessica Galera. From Federal News Network. Mariel Padilla. And we'll just open it if there's any other questions from the group. If you could just please make sure you identify yourself.
Davis, you go first.
Appreciate you, Steve. This is Davis from Army Times. My curiosity was piqued when we talked about the importance of this directive as a way to centralize disparate guidance from a bunch of different regulations. But, the way that Army directives are used are as a stopgap measure to take immediate action on something while the regulations are changed and implemented, and then the directives go away. So what is going to happen here to ensure continuity of synchronized policies after the big regulation updates are complete here and this Army directive goes away? What is the long-term plan to sustain this effort and focus on parenthood in the Army?
Well, some people are already joking about maybe writing a parenthood regulation. But in the meantime, I'm proud to say that TRADOC's taking the lead on a small task force to make sure that all the disparate regulations are updated consistent with the intent of this directive as we wrote it. We're working with the proponents who not only were part of the actual drafting and staffing process, but now in the implementation phase to make sure that the regulations are implemented correctly. And so that task force is going to be working, in the spreadsheet that it inevitably has to create to support the proponents hopefully can just be a tool or a resource. I mean, the directive also compels the creation of an online toolkit, a best practice toolkit where various tools will be present. So I can't say what form the ideal answer to your question will take, but we recognize that a lot of these policies did exist in some form. A number of them did, but they were not being interpreted correctly or interpreted consistently across the force. And so we definitely are not done having the conversation because we recognize your question is very important. It's something that's top of our mind. It's why we wrote the directive in one omnibus piece as we did, and definitely is something that senior leaders will discuss and move forward with, whether it's its own regulation or just a spreadsheet of some kind in the toolkit that we will eventually create.
Thanks, Davis, for your question. Oh, sorry, Major, go ahead.
Yes, if I may add, so some of the initiatives, they do have a parent regulation that they belong to, and with the publishing of the Army directive will allow us to update those regulations with this guidance in there. Some have already been published in regulations. For example, temp promotions was a part of our Army promotions regulation, AR 600-8-19, that was published, I believe, May of 2019. We just didn't have the ability to execute when we initially published it, but we've since developed the processes to be able to execute the temp promotion. So some of them are already codified in regulations or will be based on the Army directive now.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. Is there another question on the line? We have time for about one or two more.
So I have a question and a follow-up question. I indicated that I wanted to ask a question earlier, but I think my username must have caused confusion.
And could you tell us your affiliation and name?
Yes, ma'am. So my name is Carly Goldenberg, and I'm with Army Magazine. My first question of the two questions is, I had the privilege of speaking with Staff Sergeant Edge and multiple other people from the Army Mom Life last spring when the postpartum regulation changed from 180 days and was doubled. And one of the things that someone said during that conversation is that women in the service, including those who are pregnant and postpartum, are a source of strength and that they contribute to teams in ways that are meaningful and contribute to the mission. And so I was wondering, in a more zoomed out fashion, how this directive plays into that cultural shift to not just include women, including those who are pregnant and postpartum, but to identify them as a source of strength within our Army. And then I have a follow-up question as well.
I mean, I'll just start. I'll start by saying, you know, pregnancy is not a unhealthy, negative malady. It is a healthy, natural life event that should be celebrated. And that's part of our effort to normalize parenthood, is that expanding one's family is natural, it is healthy, and when our female warriors undergo such a life event, they shouldn't be treated like they're sick. They should be celebrated as we have one more member of the Army team. And what can we do to ensure that she is supported and can continue to fulfill the oath that she pledged years earlier? And the same applies to adoptive parents and all parents. And so I think culture shift takes a lot longer than just writing a directive, but we hope that the directive will give the tools to begin that normalization of parenthood that's necessary.
I think there's this stigma, and we've talked about it this week, around parenthood in the Army, and not just for moms, but for dads too, especially single parents, whether they be man or woman. And I think this directive is going to help fight that stigma that, you know, just like Amy said, parenthood is normal. It's a part of life. It's, you know, what most of us in life would like to do. I know not all of us would, and I think having this is just going to help the force understand, like, this is a normal part of life. And while we want to make sure that you can succeed in the Army, we also want to make sure that you can succeed in your personal life as a parent. And I think this just bridges the gap, and it really shows them, like, hey, we want to improve your quality of life. The Army wants to put people first, and this is a step towards that.
Yeah, and I think the last part of that, you know, and Amy can give you the numbers better than I can, the amount of women who are actually pregnant in the Army is such a small number, it's really a negligible impact on near-term readiness, right? But the return of investment and the return that you get on a long-term investment with this culture change of normalizing pregnancy and postpartum and recognizing our female warriors as a member of our team, and that, you know, pregnancy doesn't stop me from being a member of your team, and I'm, you know, allowing women to come back stronger will really get us such a huge return on investment that this is something we have to do to start the culture change, because it will take time, but this is what we have to do for the future of our force and to have, you know, a better and lethal force. So what a great question. Thank you so much.
Yep, 0.6% of the Army is pregnant at any one given time. But for the 180,000 women in uniform, for the 400,000 parents in the Army, at some point in their careers, they will be affected by one or more of the policies in this directive. That's the long-term investment in readiness.
Are part of the bigger umbrella of diversity, which is the strength of our Army. We would not have that equal diversity without the women who are raising their right hand, willing to serve within our Army. And of course, they're doing so well. We've obviously changed other cultures within our Army of where they can serve, because they've proven that they have been a very viable and equitable part of our Army as a whole. So they are a huge part of our diversity, and that gives us the edge over a lot of our opponents.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. I think you had a follow-up question, and then we'll close out with that.
Okay. Yes, this is a logistical question. Apologies if this is in the directive, but I could only skim it earlier. One of the other things that came up in the earlier conversation last year with Staff Sergeant Edge was the feeling that due to logistical restrictions, those who were experiencing pregnancy or the postpartum period sometimes felt like they were behind their peers by 1 to 2 years. And so I'm curious if there's, I know we talked about the temporary promotions and how that's changing permanently within our Army, but I'm curious if there's any changes for people who are not currently pregnant or in their postpartum period, but have had a pregnancy within the past few years, to ensure that they will be able to rise in the rank in a way that is commensurate with their talent that is recognized in this directive. Thank you.
So
All right, go ahead.
No, after you, Sergeant Major.
So I think I saw the heads turn towards me on the screen. In reference to the current policy for temporary promotions, any event, obviously, that a soldier is pregnant and cannot attend PME, or also with the loss of a child, those individual soldiers will have 12 months from the end of their postpartum to be able to attend their necessary professional military education in order to maintain their promotion. Now, if there are unique situations that may exist that may not be covered within the policy, as you can see, we are always open to entertain exceptions to the policy if there are unique situations that we have not thought of or may have missed. And of course, as we receive those exceptions to policies, that can also drive a permanent change in policy if we realize that there is a significant gap in what we've already published.
So unfortunately, I think I understand where you're coming from whenever we spoke last year. So for myself and women who gave birth around my time, I don't think this policy will help us because unfortunately, it was just not the right time. The policy was published too late to help us. But I think it's important that we don't reflect on the people that it can't help and look more at the people that it will help in the future. Obviously, I made the rank, and I think others that gave birth around my time are also, getting promoted because the policy is not helping us, but we're finally getting into PME. But I think it's really important not to focus on how we were back then, but where we're going in the future.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for sharing your comments today and your very impactful stories. This will conclude our media roundtable, and we appreciate everybody who joined us today. Obviously, this is a topic that we could probably go on for quite a long time. So if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact the Office of the Chief of Public Affairs and the Media Relations Division for any type of assistance. And thank you again for being with us.